The hand gripping the wooden stake was calloused, young, barely 17 winters old, and it did not tremble. The boy, pressing the point against the prisoner's chest, had been watching his father do this since he could walk, and the first lesson of impalement, the one no chronicle records, is that the stake must be oiled and blunt. A sharp point kills too fast. A blunt point, greased with animal fat, slides past the organs and exits through the shoulder or the back, leaving the victim alive for hours, sometimes days, suspended between earth and sky like a banner of pain. If you've ever sat in a history class and heard the name Vlad the Impaler reduced to a cartoon vampire, a castle-dwelling monster who drank blood and turned into a bat, you're about to understand why the real man was far more terrifying than any fiction, and why the fiction was invented to hide something even darker. The year is 1462. The place is the fortress of Poenari, carved into the Carpathian cliffs like a stone fist. Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, Prince of Wallachia, has just done something no European ruler had dared in living memory. He marched into Ottoman territory, burned villages that had been tributary for 50 years, and left the main road to Constantinople lined with 20,000 stakes. Not bodies on pikes after a battle, stakes. Living men impaled in ordered rows that stretched for 3 miles, each one arranged by rank. The higher-ranking officers staked higher off the ground than the common soldiers. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople himself, arrived to see this forest of dying men and simply turned his army around. He did not attack. He did not negotiate. He looked at what Vlad had built and decided it was not a battle he wanted to fight. That is the scale we are talking about. Not a monster. A military strategist who understood psychology better than any modern general. Now, most people think they know this story. Vlad the Impaler, the real-life Dracula, the blood-drinking tyrant who killed 100,000 people and bathed in their blood. You've seen the movies, the video games, the Halloween costumes. A medieval serial killer with a castle and a bad attitude. But here's what the popular image leaves out, and it's the part that changes everything. Vlad was not a random sadist. He was born into a hostage crisis. At age 11, he and his younger brother Radu were handed over to the Ottoman Empire as political hostages, essentially human collateral, guaranteeing their father's loyalty. Imagine being 11 years old, taken from your home, locked in a fortress called Egregos, the Crooked Eye, and trained to be an Ottoman janissary. You learn Turkish, you learn the Quran, you learn how to use a scimitar, and every day you watch your brother, the pretty one, the charming one, slowly convert to the enemy's side. Radu became a favorite of the Sultan's court. Vlad never broke. He watched, he learned, and he waited. If you've ever been the outsider in a room full of people who want you to change, who want you to abandon everything you were raised to believe, you already understand the first layer of Vlad's psychology. He was not born cruel. He was forged in an environment where cruelty was the only language that got results. The Ottoman Empire did not take hostages to be kind. They took them to break them, to turn them into loyal servants, to absorb the sons of Christian princes into the Islamic military elite. And it worked. Thousands of Balkan boys became janissaries, became viziers, became the very backbone of the Ottoman war machine. But Vlad Dracula, the son of the dragon, refused to break. And when he finally escaped captivity and returned to his homeland at age 17, he carried with him a conviction that would define the rest of his life. Mercy is weakness. The Ottomans respected one thing only: overwhelming, undeniable terror. If you've ever felt like the outsider who refused to convert, you already understand the furnace that forged Vlad's conviction. Mercy is weakness. Subscribe to keep walking through this dark corridor with us, because the textbook never tells you what happens when that conviction meets the real battlefield. Drop "Mercy is weakness" in the comments. Would you have broken in that Ottoman fortress? Or would you have held on like Vlad? When Vlad became Prince of Wallachia the first time, he lasted less than a year. The boyars, the powerful noble families who had killed his father and buried his older brother alive, pushed him out. They wanted a puppet, someone they could control. Vlad fled to Moldavia, then to Hungary, begging for military support, and eventually found himself in the court of Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary. And here's where the story gets strange. Matthias had no interest in helping Vlad retake his throne. It was more useful to have a weak, Ottoman-friendly Wallachia than a strong, aggressive one. So Matthias did something that would shape Vlad's legend forever. He imprisoned Vlad, not executed, not ransomed, imprisoned. For 12 years, Vlad Dracula sat in a Hungarian prison cell. And in those 12 years, a rumor began to spread across Europe. A rumor that grew into a slander campaign, then into a legend, then into a literary character that still haunts the world. Here's the contradiction that nobody talks about. The first written accounts of Vlad's cruelty did not come from Ottoman sources. They did not come from Romanian chronicles. They came from German pamphlets printed in the Holy Roman Empire, mass-produced by the brand-new printing press, and they were propaganda. Matthias Corvinus, the king who had Vlad locked up, needed a reason to keep him locked up. He needed to justify to the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor why he wasn't using this famous anti-Ottoman warrior in the crusade against the Turks. So he commissioned pamphlets, woodcut illustrations of Vlad dining among impaled victims, dipping his bread in their blood. Accounts of Vlad nailing turbans to the heads of Ottoman ambassadors who refused to remove them. Stories of Vlad forcing a woman to cook and eat her own husband. Some of these stories were true. Many were exaggerated. And the ones that were completely fabricated, well, they spread like wildfire because horror sells. You see, the printing press changed everything. Before the 1450s, information moved at the speed of a horse. A rumor could take months to cross the Alps. But by the 1460s, German towns had printing presses churning out pamphlets in days. And what sells more pamphlets? A story about a competent but harsh border prince defending his territory, or a story about a literal demon who turns the landscape into a forest of corpses. The pamphlets chose the demon, and the image stuck. It stuck so well that 400 years later, Bram Stoker would stumble across a footnote about a 15th century Romanian prince called Dracula, meaning son of the dragon, and decide it was the perfect name for his vampire novel. Vlad the Impaler became Count Dracula, a creature of the night who drinks blood, sleeps in a coffin, and crumbles in sunlight. The real Vlad was none of those things, but the propaganda machine outlived the man. So who was Vlad Dracula, stripped of the fiction? He was a feudal prince ruling one of the most vulnerable territories in Europe. Wallachia sat directly between the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, a buffer zone that both empires wanted to control. It was a land of constant war, shifting alliances, betrayal as a profession. Vlad's father, Vlad Dracul, had been a member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order founded by the Holy Roman Emperor to defend Christianity against the Ottoman advance. That dragon emblem, the one you see in the old paintings, is not a fire-breathing monster. It is a symbol of crusade, of oath, of sacred duty. Vlad Dracul failed in that duty. He allied with the Ottomans, sent his sons as hostages, and was eventually assassinated by the boyars he tried to control. His son, Vlad Dracula, would not make the same mistake. He would not compromise. He would not negotiate with the forces that killed his father. He would burn the entire system down. This is the part that history textbooks sanitize. Vlad's first act when he retook the throne in 1456 was not to wage war on the Ottomans. It was to destroy his own nobility. He invited the boyar families to an Easter celebration. They came dressed in their finest clothes, expecting a feast, expecting the new prince to show deference to the old families. Vlad watched them eat. He watched them drink. And then he had the doors locked, and he arrested every single one of them. The older boyars, the ones who had killed his father and buried his brother alive, were impaled on the spot. The younger ones, their sons and heirs, were marched 200 miles north to a site called Targoviste, and there they were forced to build a fortress with their bare hands. No tools, no food, just their hands and the mountain stone. Many died. Those who survived spent years constructing Poenari, the fortress that would become Vlad's stronghold. He turned the oligarchs who had betrayed his family into slave labor, and he made their suffering the foundation of his power. And it worked. For 6 years, from 1456 to 1462, Wallachia was stable. The roads were safe, the markets were full. Merchants could travel from Brasov to Bucharest without being robbed. Vlad's code of justice was simple and absolute. Steal, and you lose your hands. Lie, and you lose your tongue. Commit treason, and you lose your life in the most public, memorable way possible. The chronicler Leonikos Chalkokondyles, a Greek historian writing in the court of the Ottoman Sultan, recorded that Vlad's subjects feared him more than they feared the plague, but they also respected him, because in a world of corrupt boyars, treacherous princes, and Ottoman raiders, a ruler who kept his word, even a terrible word, was a ruler you could build a life under. So you have a ruler who made the road safe by making fear the currency of the realm. 6 years of stability, paid for with hands and tongues and lives. If that kind of brutal calculus fascinates you, if you want to see how power built on terror holds when a bigger storm rolls in, then subscribe, because Mehmed the Conqueror is about to march, and this story is not over yet. And in the comments, tell me, would you have chosen Vlad's rule over the chaos that came before? I want to hear your answer. But here's the problem with governing through terror. It works brilliantly until the terror meets a bigger terror. In 1461, Sultan Mehmed II, fresh from the conquest of Constantinople and the subjugation of the entire Greek world, decided that Vlad Dracula had become a problem. The Wallachian prince was refusing to pay the annual tribute. He was raiding Ottoman supply lines. He had killed the Ottoman ambassadors who came to demand payment, nailing their hats to their heads as a message. Mehmed sent a force of 18,000 men to capture Vlad and bring him to Constantinople. Vlad didn't just defeat them, he annihilated them. He used the forests of Wallachia to his advantage, launching night raids, burning Ottoman camps, and leaving the bodies of captured Turks impaled along the marching routes, so that the reinforcements found a corridor of their own dead waiting for them. The few survivors who stumbled back to Ottoman lines described it as walking through hell. The Sultan, they said, wept when he heard the reports. Not from grief, from rage. Mehmed II was not a man accustomed to losing. He had breached the walls of Constantinople, the greatest fortifications in the medieval world. He had defied prophecy and history, and the desperate prayers of an entire empire. And now, a petty prince from a mountain province was making him look weak. So Mehmed raised the largest army he had ever assembled. Estimates vary, but the chroniclers put the number at around 60,000 to 90,000 men, plus artillery, plus a fleet on the Danube River. This was not a punitive expedition. This was an extermination campaign. Mehmed intended to erase Wallachia from the map, to replace Vlad with his own brother Radu, the one who had converted to Islam and become an Ottoman favorite. And Vlad knew he could not face that army in open battle. He had maybe 15,000 men. He had no navy. He had no allies. The Hungarian king had abandoned him. The Moldavians were too weak to help. And the Pope was still trying to figure out if Vlad was a useful crusader or a liability. So Vlad did what Vlad always did. He changed the rules. He used the land itself as a weapon. He poisoned the wells. He burned the crops. He moved entire villages into the mountains, leaving the Ottomans to march through a wasteland. And then, at the river crossings, he hit them. The most famous engagement is the night attack of June 17, 1462. Vlad led 7,000 horsemen into the Ottoman camp at Targovista under cover of darkness, and they cut through the tents like a scythe. The chronicler Tursun Beg, an Ottoman historian who was there, wrote that the camp panicked, that soldiers killed each other in the confusion, that the Sultan himself had to barricade his tent and fight off attackers in the dark. Vlad personally led the charge. He was wounded in the head, in the arm, in the leg. He kept fighting. He was aiming for Mehmed's tent, and he nearly reached it. But the Ottoman numbers were too large, and eventually the attackers had to withdraw, leaving thousands dead behind them. The night attack failed in its primary objective. It did not kill the Sultan, but it achieved something almost as valuable. It broke the morale of the Ottoman army. They had never faced a commander like this, a man who would charge into a camp of 90,000 men with 7,000, a man who would burn his own country to starve them, a man who would line the roads with the bodies of their comrades. The chronicles say that Mehmed spent the next month marching toward the Wallachian capital of Targoviste, and the closer he got, the worse the stench became. When he finally arrived at the city, he found it abandoned. The gates were open, the streets were empty, and the wells were poisoned. And outside the city walls, in a field 2 miles long and a mile wide, stood the greatest horror of Vlad's career. 20,000 Ottoman prisoners captured over the previous years of raiding, impaled on stakes arranged in concentric circles by rank, the highest officers raised on golden-tipped poles. The grass was gone, the ground was black, and the crows had turned the sky dark. Mehmed II, the conqueror of the greatest city in Christendom, looked at that field and made a decision that no emperor had ever made before. He ordered a retreat. He turned his army around and marched back to Ottoman territory, leaving Wallachia unconquered. He had lost the campaign, not to a fortress, not to a wall, not to a river, to a man who understood that the line between genius and madness is invisible to everyone who is not standing on it. And here's the part that will keep you up at night if you think about it too long. That field of 20,000 stakes, Vlad built it to save his country. He knew he could not match the Sultan's army in numbers. He knew he could not match them in artillery, in training, in resources. So he fought the only way that gave him a chance. He used terror as a force multiplier, and it worked. The Ottoman invasion of Wallachia was repelled. Mehmed II, the greatest general of the 15th century, had been stopped by a prince with 15,000 men, a poisoned countryside, and a willingness to do what no other European leader would do. Vlad Dracula became for a brief moment the hero of Christendom. The Pope praised him. The Hungarian king sent congratulations. The chroniclers of the West, the very same ones who had spread the propaganda of Vlad's cruelty, suddenly wrote about him as the defender of the faith. But that moment did not last, because the same mechanism that made Vlad a savior also made him a liability. In 1462, after the Ottoman retreat, Vlad needed more men to hold the country. He had lost thousands in the campaign, and his brother Radu was still in the field with Ottoman support, slowly winning over the Wallachian boyars with promises of peace and stability. Radu was charming, forgiving, willing to compromise. Vlad was uncompromising, terrifying, and running out of options. The boyars who had survived Vlad's purges began to defect to Radu's side. They preferred a sultan's puppet to a madman. In the autumn of 1462, Vlad was betrayed by a close ally, a Wallachian noble who opened a mountain pass to the Ottoman forces. Vlad fled north, hoping to reach the court of his ally, the King of Hungary. But the Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, had already decided which side was more useful. He arrested Vlad the moment he crossed the border and threw him into a prison cell near Buda. 12 years. 12 years in a Hungarian prison. 12 years watching his enemies rewrite his story. And while Vlad sat in that cell, the pamphleteers of Germany were hard at work, turning him from a prince who had saved his country into a monster who had terrorized it. The same printing presses that had spread the news of his victory now spread the propaganda of his villainy. The stories grew wilder with each edition. Vlad dipped his bread in blood. Vlad forced a mother to eat her children. Vlad impaled 14,000 people in a single day. The numbers were false, the details were invented, but the emotion was real. A prince who would impale 20,000 prisoners to win a war was capable of anything. And in a way, the pamphlets were right. Vlad was capable of anything. That was exactly what had made him dangerous to the Ottomans, and exactly what made him dangerous to everyone else. And here's the thing. The pamphleteers that turned Vlad into a monster, they did their job so well that their lies became the truth for 500 years. But if you want to know what really happened next, how a broken prince got one last shot at redemption, you need to subscribe. Because the next part of this story, Vlad's final campaign, is the part that textbooks always skip. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments. What's one historical figure you grew up believing was evil, only to later realize their enemies just told the better story? Drop that name below. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the pen is always sharper than the sword. In 1476, after 12 years of captivity, Vlad was released. King Matthias needed him. The Ottoman Empire was threatening Hungary's southern border again, and the army needed a commander who would terrify the Turks. Vlad was given an army, a title, and a mission. He marched south, back into Wallachia, and he retook his throne in a lightning campaign that lasted weeks. It was his third and final reign. He was 45 years old, scarred, bitter, and probably broken by the years of imprisonment. He ruled for only 2 months. In December of 1476, near the village of Bucharest, Vlad was killed in battle. The accounts differ. Some say he was killed by a Wallachian boyar who had betrayed him. Others say he was killed by Ottoman assassins. The most popular story is that he was surrounded by Turkish forces and hacked to pieces, and that his head was cut off, preserved in honey, and sent to Sultan Mehmed in Constantinople, where it was displayed on a spike as proof that the Impaler was finally dead. And this is where the story of Vlad Dracula, the historical man, ends. But the story of the monster was just beginning. The German pamphlets became books. The books became folklore. The folklore crossed the Carpathians into Transylvania, where the Saxon villagers passed down tales of a vampire prince who rose from the grave to drink the blood of the living. Bram Stoker found these tales in the British Library in 1890, combined them with a historical footnote about a Wallachian prince called Dracula, and created Count Dracula, the most famous vampire in history. And now, when you hear the name Dracula, you don't think of a prince who held the Ottoman Empire at bay with nothing but terror and wood. You think of a pale aristocrat in a cape, sleeping in a coffin, turning into a bat. The man who saved Europe from conquest became a Halloween decoration. If you've ever felt like history is written by the winners, you are not wrong. But in Vlad's case, the winners were not the men who beat him. They were the publishers who sold more pamphlets by making him worse than he was. The Ottoman chronicles actually treated Vlad with a grudging respect. They called him Kaziklu Bey, the Impaler Lord, and they wrote about his military tactics with admiration. It was the Christian chroniclers, the German printers, the Hungarian propagandists who turned him into a monster. Because a monster is easy to lock away. A monster is easy to discredit. A monster cannot be a hero. And the King of Hungary needed Vlad to be a monster, so that no one would ask why the man who defeated the Sultan was sitting in a prison instead of leading a crusade. The real Vlad Dracula was not a vampire. He was not a cartoon. He was a product of his time, a man shaped by betrayal, captivity, and the constant threat of annihilation. He made choices that we, from our comfortable modern perspective, call evil. But those same choices saved his country from conquest. They held back the most powerful empire in the world at a moment when no one else would. And they created a legend so powerful that it outlasted the empire, outlasted the kingdom, and outlasted even the truth. The field of 20,000 stakes is gone. The fortress of Poenari is a ruin. But the story of the Impaler, polished by propaganda, sharpened by horror, and immortalized by fiction, remains the most enduring legend of the medieval world. The crows still circle the Carpathians, and somewhere in the borderlands between history and myth, Vlad Dracula is still waiting, still watching, still proving that the line between the savior and the monster is drawn not by what you do, but by who tells your story after you're gone. The textbooks will tell you he was a tyrant. The movies will show you a vampire. But you've walked the castle walls with me now. You've seen the truth buried under centuries of ink. And that truth is both simpler and more frightening than any fiction. Vlad the Impaler was a man. A man with a wound that never healed, a kingdom that never loved him, and a war that he won by becoming the very thing his enemies feared most. True students of the blade, the question isn't whether he was a monster. It's whether any of us, facing the same crucible, would choose differently.